Hi, it's Chip again. And for this video, we're going to be just doing a bit of a recap. Just look at what we have, see if we can find any issues, reverse the hotkeys again so that we're all on the same page. And just in general, look back to what we have right now and where we can be going. Alright, so first of all, translating, middle mouse button, click it and hold it. And that's how you do that. Spacebar to rotate the map. Ctrl G to get the slope. This is very useful, very important. It gives you a very clear idea of what's flat, what's not, and what areas you need to pay attention. For example, in this case, you can see that the decals do not entirely represent the degree of the slope, so we should probably fix that. And then we have, when we go to the terrain, you can click 1, 2, 3, 4 to change the mode here at the top left corner. 1, 2, 3, 4, so we can go from standard to blur, etc. We can use S and then click with the left mouse button to adjust strength. We can do the same thing with B of bob or brush to increase the size of the brush, as you can see. There we go. And then we can choose different brush textures. Now we're going to be talking about these in the more advanced videos because they can be really powerful to making your map. That's a really weird way of saying it. To help you make the map a lot more faster, but also with a lot more control. We're going to be looking at how we can use Road Machine to make these brushes, but that's not today. And then we have these functions here at the bottom. Now at this point we don't want to use set terrain height because that flattens the terrain. That would be a bit of a shame, but we can add height so that in case we would like the water to be deeper but we can't because we're at a height of 0, we can add a height to the entire terrain so that we can make the water deeper again. And then we have the export and import height map. Now I'm just going to do that so that we can see what happens, and we're gonna go to our map, which I recall we put that map here in user. And there we go. And here we have the height map.raw. And if you're in Photoshop and you'd like to open up this height map, then you're gonna make sure that you have the right settings. So let's look at those settings. You're gonna make sure that for a, let's see, 1 channel 16 bits IBM PC. For a 5x5 it's 257 times 257, that is 2 to the power of 8 plus 1. For a 10x10 that is 2 to the power of 9 plus 1, and for a 20x20 is 2 to the power 10 plus 1. But always remember that plus 1. Photoshop should fill that in for you. And make sure you've got 16 bits in the IBM PC, and then here is the height map. Now the height map initially doesn't really look like a lot because you got to remember that the map can go up to 256, and currently we go up to 15, 16. Yeah, 16. So we're sort of not using a lot of the resolution that we're looking at here. But if we spice up this by doing the auto curves, auto contrast, there we go, then suddenly we can see our map, right? We can see the lower edge, we can see the plateau that we made and the little extra smaller plateaus in the water. So this is the height map. Now usually you don't want to overtone it, but in case you want to apply a filter, let's just do that for the sake of experimentation. Let's add this crystallize effect. No, that's going to be absolutely horrible. Let's apply another effect. This little distort. Well, why does it tell me to save? Okay. Where is the pixelate fragment? I think that looks horrible too. Okay, this is going great. Let's just go for crystallize and set it on a very small, needs to be at least 3. There we go. Now let's save this again. Now we want to save it as a raw. Here we go, and then we have the height map -alt. And again, IBM PC awk. Now in case you want to make a height map from scratch, grayscale 16 bits per channel. And now if we would import our edited height map, Let's do that real quick. There we go. You can see that it certainly looks... Actually, it doesn't look that bad. It kind of does. But it looks different because we applied this effect in Photoshop. I like how the cliffs work now. I like that. Right, but that's just a very simple example of how that importing and exporting mechanic works. And by all means, if you know how to import and export, you can use more advanced software like World Machine again to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. But that's about it for the terrain. Then we had the textures where you can choose your layers. And sometimes if you put your layer in, the editor lags really hard. So you got to restart the editor. And you can paint again. You can change the brush size by holding B. You can change the strength by holding S and then clicking your left mouse button. You can adjust this target value, which we use for the ramps, to just color the ramps instead of actually applying that dirt texture to it. We're just using it to color it. This slope min-max doesn't work. The rotation rotates the brush. Could be useful, I suppose. And then there's this scattering. Never used it. You should give it a go. And linear brush is about the fact that the first... Yeah, so it's a bit tricky to explain, but... Oh, look at that. Was that like that before? Apparently it was. Alright, we can fix that. Is it like that here too? No, that's all. Anyway, we can fix that. But linear brush means that instead of this initial waiting period where nothing happens, linear brush kind of makes it affect linear. It's a bit technical why that is. I'm not going into that for this video. And then you can clear the entire layer mask in case you're not satisfied with it. Settings, you can move layers up and down. So in case you want rock to cover something else or you want the snow to be on top of the rock, then you can move them up and down. You can export the strainer mask similar fashion as to what we did here. So you can save it. In contradiction to the height map, the stratum layer is about twice as small and it's only 1 bit. There we go. Fit on screen 100%. For some reason it's the same size. I'm not really sure why, but it should be smaller. Anyway, and then you can import it back again in case you made your changes. Same thing with the stratum settings. I don't really use that. I have no idea what a stratum template is. Never used it. There's this use TT terrain XP shader. If you turn that off, then the last 4 stratum layers are gone, and you kind of use a different shader that makes the terrain look different. You can experiment with that, but it's pretty advanced. And that's pretty much all we did in terms of the terrain. Well, but we also worked on the markers, and in particular we discussed why we place markers at places and specifically what it means for a marker to be at a place. For example, these 3 mask extractors we consider to be safe extractors. Safe in terms of that they're not raidable because your ACU or your base or a lot of land factories are there, so a lab or a bomber is not going to be able to take these down. But this little mass extractor right here is very easily raidable because one artillery from right about there can take this out, and if you don't have the land presence to do that, then you can't stop this. Same thing for this extractor right here. If you got a raiding party going, then they can snatch up your engineer, preventing your engineer from building this little mass extractor right there. And that's why we call these raidable. Right, because they're easy to raid and they reward. That's what we're doing here. We're giving the player a reward for having a certain type of presence or trying certain type of tactics. And similarly for the attacking party, the raiding and succeeding is the rewarding behavior. For the defending party, having a tank with your engineer and protecting the engineer from the raid is the rewarding behavior. And then we have the expendable extractors. These are part of an expansion. we only have a very small expansion here to our left, while the hydrocarbon plant is on the right, which means that the hydrocarbon plant is erasable because your ACU is not going to stay around here because it has a lot more value to protect these 3 extractors right there. And then we had contestable extractors, which don't really belong to any player, but they reward you for having land presence, right? These are in the middle of the 2 players, so depending on where they send their ACU and where they have more or less tanks, they can manage to grab these extractors. And that's to reward having presence on the map. And that's what we were discussing about these markers here. And we had a similar discussion in terms of props, how you can reward the player for certain type of behavior. For example, we have this little extractor here with these 3 tiny rocks next to it, which is only about 20 mass. But if you're gonna take this extractor anyway with an engineer, then you may just as well click these 3 rocks. That is worth half a tank, right? That's just the tiny little bits of reward that we can give the player for doing additional tasks. Similarly with the trees, or with these rocks right here, the bigger rocks, these smaller rocks here, or the bigger rocks right there, it's all about rewarding the player for doing something. Yeah, that's with the props. Placing props was done by painting. Again, brush size and strength size, where brush size is changed by holding B and then the left mouse button. Strength size is changed by holding S or V and then moving the clicking the left mouse button and moving around. The slope min max doesn't work again. Allow with water means that you allow the props to be placed on top of the water. And snap to grid means that they snap to the build grid that we see. If we go here to build grid, which is pretty hard to see on a snow map, but here you can very clearly see this build grid here, and then it snaps to that build grid. And then you can click here and you can choose your props, your type, your biome, and then in the category you can choose props, and then you can drag these in and then start painting them to get, whoa, a lot of props. Did that remove all of them, or do I have some leftovers? I think it's time. Yeah, and note of the prop statistics here at the left bottom, that gives you a good indication of how much reclaimable stuff is in the map. The more reclaimable things there is, the more the map becomes a gigantic snowball effect, because the person with more presence is able to reclaim more than the person with less presence. So you don't want this to be a really, really high number. And then last, but certainly not least, we spoke about decals and about how you can place these decals to make your map look better in general. Now, with that said, in the next video we'll be talking about decals too, so I'm gonna round up the recap here, and then we can start working on this upper plateau.